Hey, welcome to the Mark Workman Show and the Pioneer Mind podcast, where we explore the ideas of being a pioneer and an innovator that shape and build our world. It's something that's just literally been ripped from society. I guess I walk around here. I guess I'm an old guy now, and it probably sound that way in terms of people making fun of those old guys there. Saying it's better way back when. But the truth of it is that something has changed in our culture where we have gone away from thinking and learning in a way that creates innovators, creates creativity. I always end every show with the idea of, read books, learn a language, learn an instrument, stretch yourself. And again, that's something I've gathered as a part of my life as a routine. Is kind of always reading and learning and spending quite a bit of time doing that. And it's only benefited me, and I know it's benefited my family, even without them maybe knowing completely. But it's just something I want to emphasize today. I want to do a show about this idea of reading and reading books and being a self learner, being curious, and not being in a hurry to learn. Dallas Willard is one of my mentors. It's a guy that I've read every book he ever written. He's now passed away, but he's a modern teacher and mentor to many. But for me, one of the things he taught was this idea that those who learn in a hurry or want to have information or knowledge in a hurry learn the slowest. And I think that's really true. I think it's a cumulative process of putting yourself in a day-to-day position to uh, uh, be growing and maturing through study and through reading and through development and all those kind of things. So it's a daily practice. It's a daily discipline. It's something people need to do, and then all of a sudden down the road you're somewhere you never thought you could be. And so we want to talk about that today. So first of all, I want you to like and subscribe. And this is going to be kind of a monologue episode about reading books. And it sounds super boring, but I think it'll be interesting if you give it a shot, and it might encourage you to be a little different about this subject in terms of what the culture's telling you, in terms of the way we've done education and the way we're growing people. So anyway, subscribe and like that really helps the show. It's free to you, and it really helps us get the message out. Well, back in college, I was in my freshman year. One of my professors, I kind of became friends with him. He liked the basketball program, and I was, part of the program at the time. And him and I kind of connected and would, spend time together. And just a great guy, great encourager. He had a great family, and was really good to me. But one of his counsels to me was about reading books, and I took it with me the rest of my life. He basically said if you read 52 books on any one subject, you end up with a doctorate level understanding in that subject. And so I took that to heart, and and started reading in a way that I was trying to consume books not necessarily as fast as I could, but I became a very avid reader and learner. And I loved philosophy. I've read physics books, The Fabric of the Universe. It's unbelievable the amount of different subjects I've read simply out of just interest in wanting to maybe learn more about a certain subject. So it's really been something that's become a pattern in my life. I've done it most of my life. Many years, some years I'd read 40 books. Some years I read, I think in 2024, I think I read 88 books. And during COVID, read even more because they were limiting our activity. So I probably was just reading more at the time. And really, the nature of my business with what I'm doing is the technology in the oil field and in the business I'm in is changing almost constantly. The chemistry is changing, the technology is changing, AI is coming on board, robotics. The industry is shrinking right before our eyes. It's getting smaller and smaller. At the same time, it's getting more efficient and challenging as well, because technology is bringing some challenges that I don't think anyone saw. Because it's just hard to train an AI to do something some guy just intuitively does in terms of tools and technology and drilling and all the pressures there with doing a well. So, but they're going that direction, so it's a real challenge. So I read all the time. I'm reading white papers. I love to study crypto. I've been in that space since 2012. I am totally committed to the idea of decentralization where I'm empowered to be my own bank. So again, I understand it completely. I go to conferences, I read about it almost every day, probably an hour every day. I probably do shows on crypto down the road. Uh, but what I'm saying is that I'm just not static and came out of college with a certain set of knowledge and stayed in that position since that point. I would have been nowhere having stayed in that same position. So, really, as a person who's maybe stepped out as a pioneer, I've pioneered 3 different businesses in my career, and I've really never had a job per se. Just over broke was what I call it. But the thing of it is I was able to create and reestablish things even when challenges came in the different industries I was in. And things were out of your control sometimes, so you got to change direction and navigate. And reading was a big part of me being able to do that. In this current business I'm in, I was in the oil field, and I really had no experience in the oil field, but was in just just trying to figure out a way to kind of save my hide back in 2008 with everything crashed. I was in the housing, I was building log homes and had log home a mill selling logs all over the country. Had 1,200 builders in my program. Had a great business, shipping 7 loads of logs every day in September 2008. And it's almost like September 30th occurred and it just literally stopped on a dime. Like literally, there was no load shipped October 1st. It was like somewhere in the world, a bank said, nope, no more credit for these guys, shut it off. And I didn't ship 2 loads over the next 2 years. So I really had to kind of reboot my life. And at that time, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I started thinking about oil, gas, energy, coal, mining in those areas out here because I wanted to continue to live in the West. And I certainly didn't want to take a job. I never have been a person that can submit to the corporate world and probably want to create and establish things in my own way and on my own. So and that sounds arrogant, but the truth of it is that's just my nature, and so there's no sense going against that. So what I did at the time is that back in 2008, 2009, I chose oil, gas, energy. I figured I'd figure out a business around that, how to serve in some way, plug myself into the pipeline of that industry. Knew nothing about it, knew no language, knew no people, had no connections. No one was going to give me a shot at all because I had nothing. And so I really had to start from square one and get after it. So what I did is I ended up buying a book that was recommended to me by a guy that Dan Kita at DX Oilfield. I said, what can I read to get the language in my head so I understand what they're talking about and what they're doing? And he he recommended this book, and I read it from front to back, slip through some stuff, and I refer to it to this day. I keep it on my desk because a lot of times mud engineers and different engineers will call and I won't know what they're talking about because I'm not in the field, I'm not on the rig, and they assume I know everything they're talking about. So I got this book and I referred to it and I read it and I figured out I focused on kind of 8 core things from this book that were the most used items in the oil field that I would develop blending around and importing and supplying to the oil field industry. So that was my guide, and it gave me the science, gave me the pH and all the different things they measure all the time for temperature, for annualized pressure on the pipe, for drill lubes, for just inhibitors, all the different things that you have to learn about the chemistry of this to get to know it. So I just basically self-taught myself. So it comes from this professor who said, read 52 books in a year. Well, I only read one there, but I've been reading ever since. I've been reading since that day. I decided to go this direction, and I read about it every day. I read about the oil field all the time. There's constant innovation. I have customers that are always innovating new products and new blends and new things to take care of problems as we're moving more from in the oil field. What's happening in the oil industry is we're moving from the easy picked apples that you can just get from the ground, that easy oil to get. That's coming time to an end. And now we're going to have to work harder to get to the oil that's more difficult. Maybe at in using the apple analogy, at a higher spot, you kind of got to get up there and work a little harder to get there. And that's the same thing that's going to oil industry. There's plenty of oil. There's no issue in terms of any of that. It's just we've gotten all the easy stuff. So now they're having to innovate to get to this more difficult oil in unconventional wells. And, and everyone's heard about horizontal drilling and fracking and all the new technologies that have come along that have just really taken it to a whole new level. So, anyway, constantly have to stay up to date on those things in my mind. And so, that self-learning process is really important. So I end about every show with the idea of trying to encourage people to be self-learners, to be lifelong learners, to never quit moving forward in terms of your brain and your thinking, your health and exercise and all this. I try to encourage you, learn an instrument, learn a language, read a book, read a biography, study some guy from history, then what he went through and the challenges he went through, the being told no, you can't do it, and he succeeds. Those kind of things build formations in you. So when you read a book, what's happening is, and you dedicate yourself to reading, and you dedicate yourself to developing and forming in yourself a more than just knowledge. There's a knowledge where you know things by heart. A lot of us have done high school and college where we memorize things. We memorize the times tables or whatever, and at least in our thing was second and third grade. I don't know what they do it now, but my point is you would memorize things, and again, that's still not knowing. There's this knowing that comes with reading that is not memorization or knowing something by heart. And again, years ago I did a play and I had to memorize tons of dialogue for the character I was playing, and I memorized it, but to this day I don't know anything about it. It was just for the moment, and again, it's gone. So when you memorize something by heart, or you know it by heart, it tends to slip away. So I want to encourage this idea that when we're reading, we're trying to read to obtain and hold. And what happens is when you read, you build character. I think it builds your ability to think and your thoughts. And it actually also builds a worldview. Again, everyone says, why do you need a worldview? Well, if you don't have a worldview, that's a worldview. So you've got to be reading to form in yourself integrity, characteristics that are just important for everyday living. And you wouldn't believe that's the case. But, when I always think of these authors, a lot of the ones I read, like, Dallas Wilder's one, I maybe mentioned that already, but he's a guy that was my mentor, read every book he ever read, Divine Conspiracy, Life Without Lack. Actually a very deep writer. He's one of those writers that he would write a paragraph, and some of these books were 500-600 pages, and I'd read a paragraph and I wouldn't understand. I'd have to go back and read it again. It was so deep and so much depth to it. And so, and again, I've read that book, specifically The Divine Conspiracy, probably 5 or 6 times, because every time I glean things out of it. So, but a lot of these authors have passed away. And you look at Socrates, Aristotle, Epictetus, Seneca, Plutarch, or whatever, the old guys, you would not really think of them. Marcus Aurelius, I've read his stuff. And again, he's coming up with this idea that the obstacle is the way, and the obstacles typically is you. The mountain is you. You have to go over you to get to this other side. So there's just wisdoms there that comes from people that are long gone, but they're still able to speak to us. So when we ignore the voice of those that are able to speak to us from long past, and when you read their stories or their biographies and you realize, oh my gosh, they were in prison, they were tortured, they were whatever, but they still painted and created and just created works of art in terms of writing that last to this day, that with wisdoms that again are born out of suffering. And again, we don't have to suffer. We don't have to bleed with them, is the idea. We don't have to suffer and bleed with them to get this understanding and this knowledge. It's really freely given to us. I always laugh when someone says, oh, that book's so expensive, it's $24. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's priceless at $24. It's nothing, because when you read it and the thing you obtain is maybe 1 or 2, 3, 4 principles that last with you the rest of your life. So reading, I have been asking quite a few people just in the last 6 months about, even my own brother and different folks about reading. And I said, how many books have you read? And some were 0. some were 1, some was 1 in college, 1 in high school, those kind of questions where, people are just not reading. And I think with the rise of the digital age and the networking and social work, YouTube, the YouTube shorts, our attention spans are gone. We can scroll through for hours on TikTok or whatever. I've just recently got on those things just in the last few months for my podcast, trying to promote it because I want it to grow. I want it to have a message. And I catch myself sometimes 20 minutes in scrolling, laughing at donkeys and marmots. And, I send those to my son Jacob and he says, "What are you doing?" And I guess I'm wasting time. So I'm learning that the distractions in this world are real and they've changed education into function. And what I mean by that is they've changed it into what is called functional education. So the idea is we're going to teach you a function. You're going to be an accountant. We're going to teach you to be an accountant, and you're going to be an accountant the rest of your life just to serve society. Or you're going to be a welder, and that's what you're going to do the rest of your life is be a welder for our society, and that's what you do. So you serve a function. You don't necessarily, they don't even really want you to change that function. They love the idea that you would just take that and run with it, and that's what you would do for life, so they could have some stability in the economy or who's ever choosing all these things. But when they changed that away from what I would call classical Christian education, I did not know I had one. I did not know I was offered one even in a public school there in Ohio, but I realized now that I was taking Latin, 4 years of Latin, French, physics, right through calculus, speech and debate was required. I was doing musical plays and I was no good at it. I was helping out actually with the sets at that time, but I did, sang in choir. You had to sing, you had to perform. I played basketball, played football, had athletics, we had training, but you had deep English training. Believe it or not, in terms of diagramming sentences, it all sounds so dumb, but you look back on it. I have asked young people today, "Have you ever diagrammed a sentence?" They don't even know what I'm talking about. They don't even know. So at a high school level, as a public school, I had a Christian education. So I went to a Bible college, and I come out of there, and I had so many interests. As a matter of fact, I didn't choose my degree until like my first semester of my senior year because I liked everything. I took chemistry and physics. I took sociology, a lot of philosophy, a lot of political science. Took math classes and computer science. I learned Fortran, COBOL, BASIC, and others. I just loved to learn everything. And I found out that I was not a good college student because I couldn't choose a function. And they would get frustrated with me in college, like, choose something, Workman, choose it. And I couldn't because I didn't know what I liked. So I really just at the end said, what am I closest to? What can I do to get that out of here? Because it was a 4 year school. You couldn't go fifth year. You couldn't do any of that. So I had just a few months to figure it out. So they said, well, if you take this one, add a lab, you can get a degree in, this and be out. So that's what I did. I had no interest in getting a degree in what I got in, but I had an amazing education. I was presented all of the philosophers, John Locke, the founding fathers. I was just presented so much information from Plato to Descartes to you just name it, on and on and on. And I became fascinated with these folks and how brilliant they were and how they wrote. They just wrote in a way that I couldn't see anyone in the modern world writing, and they did it in the dark around a candle, and they did it in just harsh circumstances. They did it in prisons. They did it on the run. They did it in hiding. They did it in monasteries with no contact with people. That monastic tradition just took so much tradition and so much information and knowledge, and it died with them. It became impractical for all the things they were learning, but because they didn't share it with the world, it was ridiculous. So again, everyone has a view on those kind of things, but history will show that they were ever learning but never understanding. That's an old saying, and it's really real. So, reading books becomes this formation process in us that, again, we kind of ignore, and we don't realize how important it is. So, again, I'm probably going to do this at the end of every show, every podcast I ever do. If I do this for 10 years, 5 years, whatever, how many years I do this, I'm enjoying this process, but I want people to grow and learn and mature and be different than where they were, they don't have to stay stuck. And, there's a book I read called The Mountain Is You, and it's stuck with me ever since I I read it. I was over in Kalispell, had rented a cabin. I had a rainy weekend. I was out on the Flathead Lake in my kayak a few times, went to a nice dinner, but it's just kind of me getting a weekend away. And I bought this book and I ended up reading it 2 times in one weekend. And the idea was that the book that I got, what the premise of the entire book was self-sabotage as a coping mechanism. That you learn to cope with life by saying, I want to lose weight, say, but then you sabotage it, and somehow that brings you pleasure or a way of coping in life. See, I'm a failure. It justifies something. It certifies something in you that there's a weakness, and see, you can't do it, whatever. But self-sabotage as a coping mechanism. So as I read that book, it really transformed my life. And again, I think there's hundreds of books like that for me, that when I read them, I was transformed. And that is one of them. The mountain is you. And what you find out, you're the obstacle. And what does Marcus Aurelius say? Again, from 2,000 years ago, he says, what you're going to find out is the obstacle is the way. That's interesting. Marcus Aurelius, 2,000 years ago, writes that the obstacle is the way. You got to go forward through your own failings, your own weaknesses, and you have to have a daily discipline to work through those things. It doesn't happen overnight, but you can begin the process of being different tomorrow than you are today. So that's pretty encouraging stuff. So it all comes from books, comes from reading, comes from wisdoms that we could never have written or understood if they'd have been lost to history. So it just encourage you to read and realize how important that is. I was thinking of being a self-learner, and it's something that's real important to me. I'm not afraid to jump in and try to learn something new all the time. And like this last few years, I learned how to play the guitar, play the banjo. I want to learn how to play the violin. I'd love to do that. I don't think that's on the radar anymore, but that's something I used to think about. And played a little violin. I took some lessons with my son because just to learn it. But even then, I still think about why I didn't continue that at the time. But learning things had became important. But I think about Leonardo da Vinci. People don't literally know his story. If I say Leonardo da Vinci, you're thinking, oh, that guy, he had it going on. He's smart, man. He knew everything. He knew anatomy. He knew engineering. He was drawing engineering things that even today have application. He was into art. And, oh my gosh, he was just a Renaissance man. He was amazing, right? Well, he was an illegitimate child that really was not allowed to attend university or school because he was illegitimate in Italy in that time. You weren't allowed to attend school. So what do you think he did? He self-taught. He totally taught himself these disciplines. So again, when you think of maybe one of the brightest minds, greatest minds in the history, maybe the Elon Musk of his time, again, it's hard to understand that, but he self-taught himself. And that came from this idea too that, one of the points I want to talk about in this show is this idea of curiosity. Curiosity is, I think of what the Wright brothers, Wilbur Wright and them guys that developed the flight. I know the story is they were given a toy as young boys. I think it was a helicopter type toy, and it created an obsession in them that lasted a lifetime. They had a bike shop. And what they do is started thinking about flying, and they wanted to fly. They wanted to figure this out. And they basically, for $1,000 total investment for their flights and for their engineering, the things they built, they were able to develop flight. Okay. Now the government at the time was onto this flight thing, and they had spent $70,000 and were working full time on it and never accomplished it. And here's these guys with a curiosity that with $1,000, and they were going back and forth to the bike shop to make money, to make another $100 or $75 over a couple months, whatever it took to come back, build the thing, and have another flight. They were doing it by trial and error. They were asking questions like, that didn't work, but maybe this will work. They had to be asking themselves questions, right? So, it doesn't take like this huge amount of funding or anything. It just takes curiosity. And, I always talk about this podcast in terms of the pioneers that shape and build our lives, right? It's the people that kind of left what they know and are heading off into the unknown with not even knowing the results. They take a risk. They don't know They don't know that, like for with me, I didn't know the language of the oil field, didn't know anything about it, didn't know what a drill string was or, whatever. And all of a sudden I had to learn that language. Well, that's the same thing for these guys. They were stepping out as pioneers and it really transformed the world, air flight has. And they were doing it out of curiosity. Curiosity is like this idea of, when you're a kid and you see a hill in front of you and you want to see what's on the other side. So you climb up the top of the hill and you get up there and then there's another hill. And then you go down and you come back up and you get to the top of the hill. I want to see what's on the other side of that other hill. And that's what happens is you get so curious that you can't stop. It's one hill after another that you keep climbing. And again, Marcus Aurelius said the obstacle is the way. And I think it's pretty important to understand the curiosity and the willingness to accept that feeling in you that, oh, I'm curious about that. I wonder what that's about, or can I learn more about it as an encouragement? I can tell you right now, someone's written about it. There's books about it. There's ways to develop knowledge and understanding that you can't get on your own. So, and again, another thing that curiosity does, what I would say moves you. You can't stay put. So many in the culture today are stuck. They literally, you read about young men that can't get off the couch. They're playing video games. They got them hooked into that cycle. Whatever. There's all kinds of things we can notice in our own culture right now where people are kind of stuck. And I believe, I have conversations almost daily, or not daily. I'd probably say at least weekly, where someone starts telling me maybe their challenges or what's going on. And as I visit with them, I realize they're stuck. They can't get out of it and they're not curious anymore. They've stopped thinking about what could be and moving forward, kind of the only new thing in the world is history, meaning the new thing that's coming tomorrow, that's new, always new. And there's something there for us to be discovering. And I think reading and studying can help us do that. Dallas Willard talks about this idea of, this daily discipline of study. He talks about study, and he's talking biblically, that we have this daily discipline of study and he uses this idea of a scaffolding that you would see around a construction site. And he says they build the scaffolding on the ground, the first level, they put the boards on, and they might even go all the way around the building and build a scaffolding. And then they come around, they build the second level, and they do the same process, all the stanchions, all the bracing, the boards, and they keep going, and they can go to the third floor, fourth floor, and they keep going as high as they want. And that's what study and reading does for you. It builds kind of platforms and organization for you to go to higher places and work in places you can't work without it. You get to places you can work safely without it. And it puts you in a place to really be safe at higher places in your life. And it's pretty cool. So when you think of it that way, and hopefully it encourages you that when you're reading, you're building something so you can go higher and farther than maybe you could before. So, and that's really important. Another thing Dallas Willard talks about and this is one of my probably negatives, I guess, is it's not a negative. It's just something that I see us doing is in our culture, we have this idea that almost anything of value can be had at once. We don't like the idea of delay or working for it. Everyone and their brother has been talking for 30, 40 years that Americans want instant gratification. I understand that's a slogan or a saying, but the truth of it is we literally, can get almost anything at once now. Our smartphones, and this is not a smartphone, but this would be example. How much does a hippopotamus weigh? And it comes back and it tells us, right? Whatever. Give me the local Pizza Hut address and phone number. Maybe even order me a pizza. Whatever. We're literally farming out all of our living and tasks to technology in a way that is just not good. And one encouragement about reading too is this is going to sound negative as well, but it's not negative. It's just an observation. Like I do buy books as audibles. Like when I'm driving or I want to read about something or have something to help me get through the 8 hours or whatever I'm doing. I do audibles and I listen to audibles quite often, but I also like to read because I'm realizing my mind. I told my wife that one time I listened to probably books on audio for about a year and hadn't bought a book. I was just listening to them. And I realized that when in the mornings when we have a time where we read together, or reading Psalms. And so I realized my eyes were struggling in moving across the page and processing what I was seeing. And I realized I was out of practice of reading. So your eyes and your brain are being trained to read every letter, every word, every prefix, every suffix, every verb and adverb, object of that verb, the adjectives and commas and punctuation and stops and starts and all that kind of stuff. You don't realize that your brain, it's important to be able to read the written word. And I think listening to it and all the technology, all the video, all the shorts on YouTube and everything has destroyed our attention span. And I would say, even from my testimony, that my eyes were struggling to keep up with what was on the written page because I hadn't practiced or had stepped away and realized how easy it was to do an audiobook. And I'm not busting on audiobooks. I still do it, but I also know that I need to read. I need to read the written word and see it in its structure and have my brain process that. And that sounds like a small thing, but it isn't, I don't think. Um, Going back to the original thing I want to talk about at the end here is just basically this idea that we can get everything at once without any effort. We can get mastery without effort. We can whatever, we're allowed to get all kinds of things without effort anymore, simply because we can just ask for it and kind of get it. Um, Sometimes, like, I've used AI a number of times for, write me a quick, greeting for a birthday or something, whatever I've used it for. And I'm astonished at how fast and how thorough and how great it is. And it starts asking me, how old is the person? What are their interests? Where do they live? I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing is absolutely astounding. And again, if you get hooked on that, it can be very deceiving. And I think it's important to not necessarily rebel against those movements and what's going on in the culture, but maintain the old ones. In our culture, everything that old is no good anymore, and that includes old people. But the old ways are like, oh, that's no good. We do it this way now, and that's just not true. There are things that have been uh, established principles for thousands of years that work perfectly, and we're starting to ignore those, and that's the danger. And so, and again, in reading, you'll reestablish some of those things and realize how important they are as you form your own worldview or whatever. So, Dallas Willard has a quote. He says, "Those who learn in a hurry learn the slowest." That's pretty fascinating. And again, we're all learning so fast, and it goes back to that memorizing things and knowing things by heart. You don't really understand. You're not creating understanding. You're just creating maybe a fact base to spit out for a game show or something. But the truth of it is, we need to be learning at the critical level, the ability to discern and hear when someone's speaking to us, that we can hear maybe that they're telling the truth or maybe that's a lie. We need to understand the challenges ahead of us in terms of work, the subtleties of relationship. And I would encourage you that all of those things can come from developing yourself and your mind and your ability to think. The Bible says, take every thought captive, casting down every argument, right? Well, we don't even do the take every thought captive. We don't even think about what we're thinking. We just are always in reaction mode. And so that's just not a good thing. So slow down, uh, you know, in some ways, I hate to say it this way, in some ways, stop. Stop the activity, the constant stimulation. Shut the TV off. Americans are watching 20 to 25 hours of television a week. Just shut it off and stop. Sit on the couch, get a good book, and begin the process of learning how to read again. And I encourage you with that. You'll be shocked at where you're at. You'll be shocked at how fun it is, and where you can be if you're trying to learn a skill. You're trying to learn new information that's going to help you. You'll be shocked at where you are in just a very short period of time. And I just really want to encourage you with that. So, if you're not reading, you're kind of stuck. You're kind of functionally dumb. I hate to say it. That sounds really negative, but literally you can't move forward. You're just stuck. You can't move. And again, we're told that here's your job, here's your function. No one's reading books. No one's kind of doing self-discipline of daily preparation to be farther than they were today for tomorrow. So I want to encourage you with that. I thank you so much. Again, this is just a brief message, and yeah, I thank you for coming to the show. Please subscribe and like. And I'm just so grateful for just being able to put out these little messages like that. I got a show coming up. It'll be taped tomorrow with Dynamic Drilling Fluids with one of their engineers, and that'll be an oil field based one. And again, promoting, my industry and what I do and their company. Energy is absolutely the future and a hope of our country in many ways. And again, it's been under attack for 30 or 40 years, and we wonder why, we're struggling, So just encourage you with that. Join me for that show. It'll be posted and announced it, and if you hit your notification, you'll get a notification bell on it, and you'll know when it pops up. I'll probably have it edited for tomorrow or Tuesday. Anyway, thanks for coming. Appreciate you guys, and we look forward to the next show.